Or just like, if you then were not who you really were, you start creating alternate dimensions where you're different people that were basically the same needed essence, but just different personalities and then all sorts of different stuff. And it'd be like a lot of different movies we already have.
Wow. If I had the ability to like transcend this dimension and make like copies of myself that each look different in other dimensions, oh my god, that would become my new obsession. My goal is to populate the known and unknown universe and all its many, what, like 11 dimensions now they're theorizing? 11 dimensions? There would be 11 me's out there.
Oh no!
And in some black hole they all meet and play a really weird game of chess. And all lose. So who has another question about this? Yes.
Yeah, so basically, you described yourself as a fanboy, Greg Eric also described himself as a fanboy. Do you find, what I'm finding is that like most of the voice actors work in anime beforehand. Is that something that you found or the other way around?
You know, it depends. And I think in my experience it's about half and half. About half the people that I know personally that have gotten into this industry were fans of it before. And were kind of around when the first wave of anime and its popularity hit, say, like late 70s, early 80s, which was when many of us were children. I say many of us, when I was around. Because that's kind of when the first wave of anime, it wasn't even called anime back then. It was, we had this term, Japanimation. Remember that? Yeah, Japanimation. It's like available on VHS. And you go to the mom and pop video store, and you have no idea if it's good or bad. You're just going to watch it, and occasionally you see it on TV in heavily edited form. But yeah, a lot of people, I know a lot of people, in fact, some of my closest friends are, in the industry, they started out as fanboys. And some of that was because of the era we grew up in. If you were a clever person, you gravitated to anime if you happened to watch it, because there was nothing like it around. Nothing. Anything, especially as a child. Animated programming was what most parents would sit their children in front of to watch. It was like the latter Sesame Street. I love Sesame Street, nothing wrong with that. But after a while, you desire something a little more mature. And as far as animated programming was concerned, especially when I was a kid, I don't know that this is true anymore, but when I was growing up in the early 80s, the choices of programming for children was either kind of goofy, fun, whimsical, episodic shows, like, say, like The Gummy Bears, or, I mentioned that, and I think I've seen one episode of The Gummy Bears, because I hate it. But you had, like, The Smurfs, you had, shows like that. They're very, they don't require, they're called, they're very lightweight in terms of, you don't have to be that attentive an audience member to just follow a child on. Sorry. Turn this off. But yeah, anime, or Japanimation, actually before I knew it was anything but just an animated show that was kick-ass, was the first time I ever encountered something that everyone thought was directed to children, because here in the States, if it's animated, it's children. It's fine, whatever, parents don't pay anything. But the first really complicated, character-driven, and stories that dealt with often very mature and difficult themes like war and things like mental instability, depression, or politics, all these really cool ideas that I'd never encountered anywhere else, and that were put in such a way that you could not just dip in anywhere if you didn't watch it from the beginning, or go back and try to find a way to watch what had come before. If you happened to find it halfway through its run, you had to put all this together, and that requires a very different kind of audience. I mean, it activates a different part of your brain. It's not a passive medium. You can't just sit there and go, oh, that's cute. It's basically the same story told over and over again, like an episode of The Smurfs or something, where it's like, oh, this happens and that happens, and then everything is solved in 30 minutes, and yay! And then the next episode, Gargamel will come back and try to kill them all, or eat them, or whatever the hell he was trying to do with the Smurfs. They never ever made that clear. But in anime, you had these long, drawn-out things where, you had to pay attention, and you got to see characters grow and develop and change, and plot twists, all sorts of crazy things that wouldn't make sense if you hadn't been watching it from the beginning. And being a child that never hadn't encountered that kind of complicated storytelling before, if I hadn't encountered that when I did, I think it would have been much longer before I found something like that, because most films or television shows that exploit that kind of, or I shouldn't say exploit, but that employ those kind of storytelling techniques are not directed towards children. So I wouldn't have encountered them until I was much older, and arguably anime wasn't directed at children, at least not American children, but because it was animated, a lot of parents accidentally started us on it, and then, oh, yay, this is really cool, and so it developed my taste for mature themes and storytelling. By mature, I don't mean 18 and up plus things, but I mean deep, profound subject matter, characters that stay with you and grow with you. They're not just clever little archetypes or funny cookie cutter, characters. They become very human to you. And it's easy to see why people get obsessed with things like that. It was easy for me to see it because for the first time you're encountering something in front of you that in a weird way gets in your head and helps you make sense of real people that you know. I remember watching things like Voltron, for God's sakes, and like Captain Harlock, and these very deep philosophical questions being asked, and they're not just there as window dressing, they're an integral part of the story. And thinking, wow, I never thought about that before. So having all these concepts thrown at me as a child, accidentally, by being put in front of a show that just happened to be animated, so my parents thought it was perfectly safe, really gave me the tools to be a much more attentive reader, audience member of much more sophisticated things. And so anime, and as I was implying earlier, it's played such an important part in my life in terms of the things I'm into in art and literature and music, because I have an unquenchable thirst for infinitely complex things. I want something to be difficult. I want it to challenge me. I don't want to just sit down and be passive and enjoy it. I don't like things that are designed to turn my mind off. I am more entertained when my mind and the wheels in this head are turning, rusty though they are sometimes. I'm much more into that kind of thing. And I think it's a shame that more people aren't. But those of us that happened to find anime when we were very young just got a taste of it, and we're obsessed with it ever since. And those of us that have come into this, business by hook or by crook or whatever, and all found our ways into this business in different ways because it is such a strange niche industry. A lot of people I know have the same story to tell. They're like, yeah, anime was just the first thing that seemed really, really cool and different, and it still is different. It still maintains that level. Like I've never not challenged by it. I'm never not completely fascinated by what it has to offer. That's not to say that all animes are created equal, of course, but anime is not a genre. That's all. I tell that to people all the time. I have some friends that aren't in the industry that don't get anime at all. They just don't like it, and for whatever reason, they just never developed a taste for it, and they just have roadblocks in their head. Like, I can't get it. So I'm trying robots and naked girls. I'm like, no, it's not. I mean, often it is, but in a good way. But it's just this crazy thing where I'm like, no, you're mistaking it. I tell people that don't understand anime, I'm like, if you can't find an anime that appeals to you, you're just not freaking looking. Because it's not a medium or a genre, it is a medium, it is simply a style of storytelling. And if you don't like the style of storytelling, well then you just don't like good storytelling. And if you don't like good storytelling, well get a fish tank and shut the hell up.
Just like that.
You have another question?
Yeah. Well, you're saying you like anime since you were a kid. Have you had any obstacles, like people telling you, hey, why are you still watching cartoons? I mean, look how old you are, from parents or friends or things?
All the time. Oh yeah, all the time. And I'm glad you bring this up because as a kid, especially when I got into my teens, I actually kind of got out of anime for a while. For two reasons. One, it was very hard, especially in the neck of the woods where I grew up, to find other people that were into it. Because a lot of people I happen to know, I grew up in a very small town, not the most progressive thinking town in the world. Not the worst by any means, but high school was a bit of a white knuckle ride through hell. And people, I would try to get people interested in things like anime, and they would just, dude, it's a cartoon, grow up. And when you're that age, especially if you're a jock or you're one of these people, when you're a teenager like that, everyone is so self-conscious about how they come across that they're not going to give something a chance that even runs the risk of making them look like an idiot or a pansy or a child to everyone else. And it's, it's a shame, but it's a truism that when you're a teenager, you adopt certain poses and say no to so much stuff just because you're so afraid of people judging you. Fortunately for me, however, I found it much later on, and that gap, I regret it. My God, I wish I'd seen this. I wish I'd been into it. I wish I'd done this. The other reason, too, was because I find in the late 80s, early 90s, a lot of stuff that was getting broadcast play was more expressly directed towards children. It wasn't often that you found on television, the really mature, darker stuff that they, by some crazy chance, broadcast in the late 70s, early 80s. There were a few examples, but you know, you had things like Pokemon. Nothing wrong with Pokemon, it's a very good show, but it wasn't my bag, and when I was that age, I didn't like it, or I didn't hate it, it just didn't do anything. Well, shows like that got a lot of play, and again, I was like, oh, I'm too old for that stuff. But then, years later, after I'd kind of given up on it, and I always thought back fondly, there were still old shows that I went back and watched all the time that I remember fondly as a kid, and then which, you know, that held up pretty well, actually. And I found Cowboy Bebop. Cowboy Bebop is a hell of a gateway drug. Like, oh my God, they should just start passing that out at, like, you know, instead of methadone. You know, if you watch Fanboy, you'll have a life. Go, you know. Because then I suddenly, it kind of put everything into perspective to me why I found those things so appealing. Because when I was a child, I couldn't describe why I thought these things were so cool. And some part of me knew it, and some part of me was just obsessed with it. But only much later could I say, that's what was going on in my head. That's what I remember. So it made me go back and look at everything I really enjoyed and understand it for the first time. That's why I love this stuff, because it was so unique and so different, and continues to be different and unique and brave, and in ways that most of the entertainment, quote unquote, that we're given here in the States, not just in the States, but in other countries as well, it just is designed to just be the same but different. I mean, it's like you'd think, I mean, judging by what most studios in Hollywood put out, you'd think, oh my God, they must think that all of us are clamoring, going, more of that, but make it just different enough that I don't feel like it's the same. And that's kind of, I don't know, like my parents are that way. They're not really, but they're not obsessed with movies or with entertainment or stories. They don't, so to them it is a passive thing. They might as well have a fish tank. It's all the same to them. And, you know, they're obsessed with other things. But what was this question about? I'm sorry, I completely lost track.
About how we respond
yeah.
to criticism about still being into anime at your age, people thinking
It was really funny, too, because those of us that were into anime that found each other a little later were all like, we had all these stories to tell, and each other like, oh yeah, I never showed this to friends. My parents never got this. And now that I'm in it, it's really funny. Now that I'm in the industry, like, I still have friends that simply do not get anime. And I love them, but they're also some of the dullest people I know. Truly, they're just not very adventurous. They're very vanilla in every respect. And that doesn't make them bad people, but I can't have a really stimulating intellectual discussion with them about storytelling and philosophical issues. You know, they're just fun to have a drink with. But, you know, I think because of my being such a fan of anime and sort of giving myself over to this love of complexity that anime engendered, I am so able to defend my tastes now that no one gives me crap at all. Because they just don't want to hear me go, oh, well, here's how you're wrong. And I have a chart. Again, anime gave me those tools. So, thank you. Let's see, you there in the second row.
Hi. I was in your Evangelion panel, and I'm just going to reference it for a second.
Okay.
Being a fanboy and also being in the industry, when you have seen like Evangelion as an example, and you had to do the voice for Haji, I can't pronounce anything today. Haji, whatever.
That was a long hair.
Yeah, it's a long day. Anyways, how did your director take it when you're like, oh, I already knew this, or I knew this anime? How did they approach you in your knowing of the anime already?
Well, it's really interesting. In this industry, something as well known and as significant as the Eva franchise, no director is going to be surprised if whoever he has in the booth playing whatever part knows everything about it, because it's just one of those keystone shows that it's a big part of just the perception of what anime is to a lot of people, both fans and non-fans alike. Eva is such a big part of that I think a director would be more surprised if an actor would be like, I have no idea what this is about, I've never encountered it before. And some people didn't, but in my case, you know, I did know enough about it that I was like, oh, this is really cool, I'm glad to be part of it. But also as an actor's professional, getting more into pro, I never ever jump the director's gun. I never ever want to tell them, well, this is what I think it should be. Because it's not my show. It's not my show, I'm not the director. My job is to go and do what the director tells me. And that's something, sometimes it's difficult, because if it is a show or a franchise you really love, and you don't necessarily agree with the director's vision of it, the fanboy inside of you goes, That wasn't the case with Ava, by the way. Oh, Mike was wonderful.